Gentlemen, this particular webinar is brought to you by Origin Blue. It's an organization that I'm a part of, and it has been in the space of talent development for the last 10 plus years now. Okay. Origin Blue is on a mission to help 115 people bring the full potential to work every day. A little bit about us. We're going to be talking about building a coaching culture. This is something that we have been doing for several leading organizations globally to help them transform from whatever their existing cultures are onto a coaching culture. About myself, the top half of this slide is most of my professional details, and the lower half is my personal details. So, been a coach for the last 10 plus years. Written about in Forbes, Business World, People Matters, did some behavioral science at Stanford, Masters in Psychology at IGNU, and before that in engineering and an MBA. I last worked as Chief Operating Officer at Transform Solution, and before that selling soap at Procter and X-ray machines at General Electric. I work very specifically on mindsets, on teams, on communications, all with a focus on habits. Bottom side, I love trekking, I love motorcycling. With my very beautiful wife. And on the extreme side is my team that helps me put most of my content together. Let me move forward from here. And people have always fascinated me, right? And not just people at work have always fascinated me because work creates that perfect storm. There are multiple beliefs that each one of us carry, and they merge together in this extremely high impact situation. There are generational beliefs. For example, beliefs that each of us carry from our parents and from their parents, and so on and so forth. Then we have our social beliefs that we build as a result of the society that we are living in. And last but not the least, we have skill beliefs which are built as we progress on a particular skill. So for example, if you come from a science and engineering background, you tend to be more analytical. If you tend to come from an arts or cultural background, you tend to be a lot more different as compared to being analytical. And all these elements merge together through the people we hire and into a pot called organization. And here we expect them to come together and work towards a defined outcome. And in that sense, work is a perfect storm. How do organizations help this entire environment come together to be able to perform better as compared to each one of them individually? At work, when we come together, we create something larger than any of us. We are able to create products or services that are much larger than what any of us individually can do. However, work also brings a lot of challenges due to these different beliefs. These challenges emerge in the form of trust issues with each other. I find it very difficult to trust somebody like that. They also come in the form of communication gap. So it's very difficult for me to communicate to somebody else, or somebody else is saying something to me, which I interpret in a very different way. And all of this creates, therefore, a lot of ego clashes, accountability issues, commitment issues, and therefore a poor result. Over the last couple of years, we have been experimenting with coaching as a culture in organizations. As a firm, we first started off just coaching. So we were a team of approximately 120 coaches who would work with several leading organizations. Think the big threes of the consulting space, BCG, McKinsey, Bain. Think the big fours of the audit and assurance space, Deloitte, Ernst & Young, PwC. We've been working with them to coach their executives. And while coaching has a certain power that it brings to the organization, this culture of coaching is something that we started investigating into a lot further. And what I'm going to talk to you about today are some of those findings. The first was, how did our current culture emerge? How did our current culture emerge, and how did our current practices emerge? All of them came in from the army. As in the 70s, organizations were scaling up. This concept of conglomerate started coming in. We started having command. We started having one general, and then lieutenants, and then colonels, and then the foot soldiers below this entire large, huge thing, which would march at a certain beat and go and conquer this entire world out. And this practice has worked fairly well. It has brought a lot of people from an agrarian environment onto a business environment and make them disciplined towards a certain execution. However, times are changing. And just when we thought that we had it all, the business environment gave us a never-ending perfect storm, right? I've been hearing of business having a perfect storm when I started my career way back in 96, in the 90s. But it's a never-ending perfect storm. And it's never-ending because of disruptive innovation that we keep getting hit by regularly. Be it in the space of AI, slightly earlier than this blockchain, slightly earlier than that SaaS-based software, and slightly earlier than that custom solutions, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of changes that are happening on the tech front. Supporting this tech front, people are themselves changing. We have this new set of people coming in called millennials, and the culture is different, right? It's a lot more individual focused versus social focused. They expect a lot more personalization as compared to what somebody like me brought up in the 80s would have experienced. And this creates a perfect storm, not at the marketplace, but also internal to our organizations. And we start having these culture clashes, attrition, and slow work overall in an organization. Can this change? And can we build organizations which are more designed for the future versus the past? Can we design organizations which are more ready for the future? And this is where can we have individuals who are self-empowered and organizations purpose-driven to be able to achieve its outcomes. And this is where, especially in an Indian context, and the Indian context is a very unique one, we have low trust. As a country, there is low trust with each other. We are significantly hierarchy-led, and we have a very youthful workforce. So there is very high energy. There is very high desire to do something greater than ourselves individually, but it's also merged with low trust, hierarchy-led gaps. And can coaching as a culture offer a solution over here? I'd like to distinguish coaching as a culture versus coaching. Coaching is when you are working with an individual to help them towards their growth targets. Coaching culture is a culture that seeps across the organization and helps it become more nimble, agile, and at the same time empowering. What does coaching culture mean? A few elements. There is no role that is called a people manager or a line manager. Every individual is accountable for his or her own results. So if I join as a young employee in the organization, I am going to be accountable for what I have to deliver individually, right? And this traditionally held people manager or line manager does not exist. Individuals are aligned to a coach who is also responsible for his or her own business deliverables for the organization. Let me pause on this slide and let me invite any immediate thoughts, reactions, comments, or questions. I've been implementing this. Tanvi, you have a thought?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, doesn't this go into the discussion of mentor and mentee kind of a program in an organization? Because that was very similar to what you just said, that people have their own roles and then they're helping out other people working with them who are maybe in a mentorship kind of a program.
I think that's a very fair question, Tanvi. Thank you so much for asking. Let me pause a bit. Let me invite any other thoughts or comments that I may have from this audience. All right. So, Tanvi, to make sure that I've captured your question right, you're asking me, Vivek, what's the difference between coaching culture versus mentoring or coaching an employee? Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
When we run a mentoring program or when we run a coach the employee program, we are focused on every individual's development needs, right? The way the policies and procedures of an organization are defined are still the way they were earlier, which is there would be a certain command structure that would be associated with every policy, a certain approval setups required for a certain policy. Second, the way the reviews get done, the way an individual is held accountable is through his or her manager. Now, he may have a coach who is also, or a mentor who is already working with him to improve, but ultimately his line manager is accountable for the results. In a coaching culture, the individual employee himself or herself is responsible for the outcomes that they are generating. Okay. It's not the line manager who is directly responsible for these outcomes.
Right. Fair point.
Now, mentoring as an activity is an essential element of building coaching culture. So, what a lot of organizations will do is they will start this process of mentoring employees, coaching employees as a formal program within their organization as they look to move towards a coaching culture. Right? So, it's a step towards coaching culture, but it's not the coaching culture in its entirety. Let me walk you through one of the cases that I've been involved in very closely. At Procter, there were a couple of things that were emerging, which is first designed for the newer environment that is building out there. Design, one of the most important elements that emerged in that organization was, hey, we have these very good people who are delivering fantastic business. We promote them. And suddenly they become line managers or they become manager of others. And as they become manager of others, their ability to do what they were really very good at, which is delivering the business, becomes that much more limited. So are we doing justice to our best talent? One. Second, by making somebody a line manager, are we reducing or eroding the trust of the others who have just joined the organization? Or are we perhaps just limiting them to the level that this particular individual is at? And there were a lot of these questions that started getting asked about the culture that the organization wants to build. And they decided to make a shift towards the coaching culture. So while there was still somebody called a line manager, but the title changed. While there were people who were reporting to each other, but each one was held responsible for his or her outcomes. And they would share those outcomes with the larger forum or with others. The coach or the manager would work with this individual to define what is right for them, to help them wherever they are getting stuck, and therefore elevate themselves to the next level. Procter continues to lead the business on an ongoing basis. This is not just unique with Procter. There are several other firms, for example, Deloitte, which is also making a shift towards this particular culture. They no longer have a title called manager. The titles are now changed to being a coach, and their responsibility is basically to build the individual so that he or she can then deliver the business. While I have talked about a couple of MNCs, this culture of coaching is also entering into Indian organizations, albeit a little slow at this particular point of time. Some leading organizations like Tata's, etc., are making very conscious choices of how do they want to shape this, and they're on that particular journey. Let me move a little further. Let me pause. Let me invite any questions that you'd like to have. Otherwise, I'll move forward. Let me move forward then. I've shared this. This is not coaching employees, but it's building a culture, so to speak of. How can an organization move towards a coaching culture? Step number one is definitely start, right? So talk to your executive sponsorship, talk to your leadership about the need to build a coaching culture. And the best thing that I have seen work for organizations is to talk about the problem or talk about the problem that we are going to solve versus building coaching as a culture. Another step, relook at the stated policies. When you move towards a coaching culture, we start relooking at the policies and we start thinking, okay, what kind of policies will be relevant when we start talking about coaching? So for example, do our policies need to be more trust-based? Do our policies need to be more open in nature such that it allows employees their own discretion and will in different areas of work? Does our policy enable a person to connect his work directly to that of the CEO or the managing director of an organization? And can that entire trace be measured? Once this entire conceptual foundational discussions are done, we move towards phase two, which is seeding. You start seeding with culture champions. Tanvi, these, for example, would be the people who become initial mentors or coaches in the organization. You'd also start socializing this with the larger organization, talking about what coaching is, what do we mean by trust, how do we build trust in an organization, how do we erode trust in an organization, how do we hold ourselves individually accountable towards what we are doing. The last is, of course, scale. Once you have got the executive sponsorship, once you have seeded it with the right culture champions, we start scaling this element up. And when I say scale, that means line managers start getting out of business reviews and let individuals taking their business reviews forward. They start playing the role of a mentor or a coach at the back end. Along with that, individuals start picking up more complex tasks as compared to what they were doing earlier. Let me pause. Let me invite any immediate thoughts. I'm going to move ahead. A couple of mistakes that we've seen as organizations implement this, right? I think the first by choice person organizations tend to pick up are mid-managers or mid-senior managers, right? Because they're very scared to make the senior most executive layer the coaches initially because, hey, what if the program doesn't work right for them? What if things go wrong? So let's start with a safer bet. And this, while it is all right, does sow seeds of issues. Your senior management doesn't understand it, so the mid-management tries to make some change. That does not get reflected very accurately. Incorporates change at the moment starts from the top. In future, I do hope change starts in small pockets and then pervades across the entire organization. But at the moment, change starts from the top, and therefore you've got to get that buy-in from them. The second, not seeding enough. So what organizations end up doing is they say, okay, now we will shift completely to phase 3, and the mentors are not ready. They are not really doing coaching or mentoring in the right way. And they're doing some feedback conversations, but not essentially development conversations. And this starts a challenge. It starts a challenge because actually you haven't made the journey, but you're telling everybody that we have made the journey. So people don't see the difference. The third mistake, while they say we are moving towards a coaching culture, it's really not translated into the policies, the KRAs, and the deliverables. Any organization that is serious about this has got to translate that into their KRA. Last but not the least, allowing old behavior patterns to emerge because we are comfortable in them, because we are easy with them, and because we have a bias towards them. These mistakes can be overcome, and these mistakes can be overcome by thinking the entire process through, by designing and getting enough buy-in at the very beginning. And last but not least, making sure that you have a good partner who you are working with to enable all of this too. This is the last slide, gentlemen. I wanted to keep it a short, very quick conversation with you. I'm a coach and I've got to translate this into actionables. Having gone through this entire deck, right? Having seen all of this, what would you like to start doing for your organization? On your notebooks, write down one thing that you would like to start doing for your organization. And a couple of tips from my side would be: one, start having a conversation with your executive leadership on, hey, should we start building a culture of coaching for our organization? Another tip that I can definitely bring to you is highlight some problems and the way the organization can be ready. So start the conversations. Think of starting just coaching or mentoring as a process in your particular organization and see how it goes from there. I am done with what I wanted to do. If you wanted to part of this conversation or the interventions around it, here is my link to a WhatsApp chat. This allows direct access to me and a few other participants who are in this. You can scan this QR code and be a part of our WhatsApp group. I'll also send you the link directly over an email as a follow-up. This is our LinkedIn page. I'd love to have all of us over here join us on our LinkedIn page. We will be posting this particular video on that link itself, so you can see it should you want to, or you can refer it to anybody else. With that, thank you very much for your time. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm extremely open to questions, thoughts that you may have at this particular point of time. Mark?
Yes, Vivek. Very valid points. I mean, you do call it as it is. However, in any organization, maybe a small one or even a Fortune 500, as you stated, it's always nice to start from the mid-level of the leadership team. However, what if I give you a scenario where there's more egoistic decisions being made by a leadership that confirms publicly that we are going to adapt a coaching culture or even a mentorship program? However, in reality, people on the ground, such as me and you, are seeing a different side of it. Now, one, you either choose to overcome that challenge by being politically diplomatic, if that makes sense. And two, you either address it head on, or maybe if you have any other suggestions or another scenario on how to inculcate that positive coaching culture.
So I think a valid question, Mark. And your question is, maybe somebody at a senior leader level does say that we want to adopt coaching as a culture, but at a practical, on a daily working level, the conversations tend to be a lot more egoistical and a lot more directive in nature still. Is that correct? And how do you handle these kind of situations?
That's right.
Yeah. This is a tricky one, but let me try to pick up what we did in a couple of organizations. Okay. At the moment, it's very important to make sure that the senior leadership does buy into the conversation, because the current culture is top down, not bottom up. That's the way it is in the current organizational setup, right? It is extremely important to get a senior leader's buy-in, and you want to get their buy-in by asking them questions like this: what legacy do you want to leave behind, right? What would you like to be remembered for in this organization, right? How do we build ourselves up for the future? And I found questions like what legacy do you want to leave behind, or what do you want to build for the future, get their buy-in and allows them to verbalize what is going on in their own minds. After this conversation, while they will say all the right words, and I understand you, it may or it may not translate into their daily actions. Start by having a coach and avoid this conversation your own self. It's what we call a career limiting move in HR, right? So start by having an external coach who works with this individual and who is able to help this individual see the mirror in the right way. Now, you want to make sure you have a coach who is senior enough and who is strong enough to be able to voice out what the organization is saying, feeling to this person in an honest way. And that does drive change. To a leader who is wanting to build an organization, it drives a significant amount of change. I've seen it work in a few cases. I've also seen it fail in quite a few cases. So it's a little bit of a sword that one needs to watch or walk on.
Thanks, Vivek. But based on what you just said, it's more on getting the leadership team to be on the same page as you, or rather the same vision as you. However, here, I just gave you a hypothetical situation where most here might just find relatable, where the leadership team is in agreement with you. There is a coach in place. There's even a third-party coach in place. However, the way things are gone about is based on a egoistic or a biased system. So if you were put in a situation like that, given your experience, how would you go about it? I mean, hypothetical situations are fine and dandy in theory, but in practical, it is harder said than done.
If I have a leader who has a high sense of ego, right, and there is a gap between saying, doing in that particular individual, then I will make sure that it percolates through different channels of communication, right? So I will make sure first the coach is able to pass the feedback. I'll make sure that there is enough data that is being captured and being passed on to that particular individual, right? Also, do remember, our interpretation of an egoistical leader might not be the same image that he or she has of themselves, right? So in their own minds, they might just be doing what is right for the business, and they might not be associating the same words with themselves, right? They might be doing what is right. In fact, quite a few such people I've also seen associate words like passionate deeply committed, hardworking with themselves, right? So one's got to make sure that what are the interpretations of what the person is doing for themselves. So once again, I think it's a more of a individual-based coaching need to help that person overcome or see things the way others are seeing it for him. I'm sure I've not answered it, but I'm happy to connect Mark with you separately and double click inside it, hash it out with you in more detail.
Definitely, Vivek.
Excellent. I'll type my email on this chat. Feel free to drop me a note and we'll talk.
Sounds good.
Excellent. Any other questions, team, over here? Any thoughts? Any experiences in building a coaching culture? Tanvi, I know you've been doing this for your organization. How is it going for you?
Vivek, Tamanna here.
Tamanna, please go ahead.
Hi, I have one question. So, let's say I see this thing being done, new initiative that the coaching has started. And yeah, I do see the leaders who are taking up this thing, coaching, they themselves are not sure about how they want to take it. The feedback, the way they're giving. So, how do we measure that? How effective had their coaching been to the people who they were trying to coach? Or it has not impacted them in a negative manner. Maybe some people were self motivated, and after they were thrown into this coaching thing, and they suddenly got so demotivated with all that feedback and all that nudging and pushing that was being given to them without giving them a proper carrot for their future.
Yeah. I think that's a very fair question to ask. I think there are two questions over there. The first one is, how do I measure what is changing in the organization, right? And the second one is, how do I keep these set of people who I start calling coaches motivated towards this outcome in a good way?
Yeah. And also, how do we see the person who's being coached? What is the impact on that individual?
Yeah.
So,
very fair question. I think all of them. And last 10 years, I've only been doing this work, right? So I'm going to give you what we have seen work. Okay. There are two ways in which coaching programs can typically be run. Okay. The first way in which you run a coaching program is an individual comes to a coach, maybe an internal coach, external coach, and the individual defines and builds a set of goals with this particular mentor or coach, whatever you want to call him, right? They'll say, I want to work upon my communication. I want to work upon my team management. I want to work upon my visibility, and so on and so forth, right? Maybe a different person in the same organization will have something else. He will say, you know what, at the stage of organization in which I am, I want to build a strategic mindset. I want to make sure that I get more sponsors for me in the next role. I want to build deeper business acumen, whatever it is, correct, depending on the organization. So you'll have this set of program which is more open-ended, generic, and so on. And it does become a little difficult to put very measurable outcomes at an organization-wide level, right? The way we have been measuring those outcomes and the way I've seen some successful elements measure this is you define individual goals, and then as the person is making that journey, make the person fill out instances or changes that they have been seeing in their behavior. Okay. In a few cases, the organizations would also ask the coachee or the mentee to map individual goal to an organization's stated competence, right? Or a value that the organization might be having. So that mapping helps you see what the movement is there. In a few cases, 360 is an option. And I always recommend a very simplified 360. So what you do is, and you can use our platform Origin Blue as well if this is something that is of interest, and we can connect separately, Tamanna, and talk about it. But a very simplified 360, which is on growth mindset, how would you rate Vivek? On communication skills, how would you rate Vivek? On strategic mindset, how would you rate Vivek? So people give some rating before, right? And then you would do this at the middle, and then you would do this at the end. So you are able to get very quick dipstick checks across the development that Vivek has undergone and the change that Vivek has undergone, right? So this is when you are able to, when you have a generic coaching program, right? A lot of organizations have now also moved towards defining some very specific behavior elements that they want to see in a certain cohort of people, right? So they will not launch a generic coaching program. They will launch a coaching program which only targets 3 specific behavior patterns. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. Is able to inspire trust and confidence with his or her people, right?
Yes. So
is
on
able
that,
to build a second layer.
yeah, I'm cutting you over there on that. I'm coming from a place where a coach, XYZ, in past, whosoever he's been aligned with, those people have exited the system and on a very bad note. So, what is the trustworthiness of that coach if I'm aligned to that coach?
Yeah. Now that is outage of that particular system. And you're right. Internal coaches, it does get into this, right?
So, I
I've
don't
had
know
one
whether, yeah, here I'm in a situation, I don't know whether that coach is actually listening to the concerns and trying to help me or acting as a manipulator or acting as a informer to the higher management to create a bad reputation. So there's a big question of trust here. I have on count like 4-5 people I see they've been aligned, they were closely working, and all of them have gone out of the system, and all of them have got a bad reputation, even though they were good performers initially. So it does not happen overnight that a good performer turns into a bad performer. There is something influencing that individual.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I hear you. If it's just a coaching program, then it's typically recommended to have an external person coach, right? Because they'll be more stable. They will not be leaving this under any circumstances, right? So that helps. Also, the trust with an external person gets built through because they know that the external person will not be going and sharing my secrets with somebody internal to the organization. So generally, we've seen that external coaches work better for organizations which want to run it in a much more systemic, standard way versus in a generic way. Right? I hear the situation, Tamanna. I don't have a good answer for you, to be very honest. It's just one of those situations that you get in where the person who you felt will be a role model is suddenly becoming a detractor. Right.
Right. Okay. I probably will connect with you one-to-one on that.
Yes, we can definitely chat up more about this one. Mark, I see you raising, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Vivek. I just want to answer or rather give Tamana the advice that we recently went through and inculcated and actually worked out for us. I think, in my honest opinion, try changing your perception of that person or that individual's reputation and go based on values, based on your work culture, rather than assuming that this person's personality or maybe even the reputation isn't that great for the corporate environment. Understand that person was where you are at the moment. They worked themselves up and then came midway or even hit the bottom part of the payload. There has to be a reason, of course. So if you get into that mentality, you would understand both ways rather than looking at one side of the coin. And that is something which is very crucial for a coach in general. I am certified in NLP, and I help a lot of people from different backgrounds to sell or even communicate. One thing that we all don't get is communication. Everyone has their own way of communicating. Everyone has their own way of understanding each one's perception. It's how you portray it to the other person. But then again, would you sit down and listen to a person who's younger than you, or where you have a perception of a person that isn't going to have knowledge of a certain topic, but would you still listen is a question. Oftentimes we will say yes on paper, but in reality, we don't really want to listen to someone who we think has lesser knowledge than us. Correct me if I'm wrong, Vivek, or even feel free to add on.
That's very fair. Thank you so much for sharing this, Mark. And your thoughts are around the perception of an individual, and go ahead with an open mind. Reset your perceptions, and maybe that will also be very fair. Thank you for sharing that. Gentlemen, it is 1:45, which is what we had parked time for this one. Any other thoughts, immediate reactions? Love to invite them. All right. Thank you very much. I do know that Kev from my team will be sharing this video recording out to all of us. Thank you all for joining in. My email ID is on the chat. Should any of you want to drop in a note, please do so. I'll be extremely excited to chat up with you.
Thanks, Vivek.
Bye. Bye, Mark. Bye, Tamanna.
Appreciate it,
Bye,
and
Tanvi.
thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, Tarun. Tamanna, see you. Thank you for the comments.